on aid in the last Labour government and support it, but that has shifted across to defence spending.
Is there anything you've totally cut in the zero-based review?
Cut?
Yeah. Is there anything that the government does that it's not doing? And there's a wider critique here, which is, are you managing the public's expectations? There's all sorts of budget line items now in local authorities in the education budget that would have been emergencies 5-6 years ago and now taking up all the budgets. Something changed fundamentally in our expectations about public spending.
Well, look, we've done the zero-based review, which is the first time in 18 years we've looked line by line. There's been a significant process of looking at savings and efficiencies, including through reform. The Office for Value for Money has done some work with us on that, and their documents are being published today alongside the spending review. Through the Savings and Efficiencies programme, we've been able to free up tens of billions of pounds, which has gone back into frontline public services, as well as putting investment up front to modernise areas of failing public service that will take us some time to fix over the course of this Parliament. We've bared down on costs, for example, in terms of the government's use of management consultants. We're selling some London properties we don't really need anymore. We're reducing the size of the civil service. So there's those types of things that are in the saving and efficiencies envelope. But have we turned something off 100% that wasn't on before? I can't think of an example.
Any famous properties?
It's quite hard to do that. Are you interested? I've got a couple to flog you. A very good price, if you're interested.
Can I ask you to give a response to Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, who has given his comment on the spending review, saying that he's concerned that it's going to result in insufficient funding for the Met and fewer police officers?
So the Met Police have had a challenging couple of years because essentially they were selling off assets they owned in order to pay for frontline policing. And obviously once you've sold the asset, you can't keep selling it. So they do have a structural challenge in the Met in particular. But as I say, funding for policing is growing at around 2%. It's now for the Home Secretary and police forces to work together about how best to manage those.
So he's got to make his case to the Home Secretary.
Yeah, the budget's been settled with the Home Secretary. There's a growing amount of spending into frontline policing. We want to support them to be able to do that. But there is a particular challenge there that, of course, my colleagues will need to work through.
He also says it's disappointing that there's no commitment today from the Treasury to invest in a new infrastructure that London needs. That's a deliberate choice, is it, on your part, to move things, the spending, the investment out of London and South East?
This is always the problem because everyone would like their thing. We can't do everything. I mean, look, there's significant investment coming into London in terms of transport for London, pretty significant chunks of money going into TfL, our commitment to Heathrow and all of the consequences around that, our commitment to affordable housing and social housing, which will include a significant build in London. But of course, are there projects that the Mayor would have liked to have had that's not been funded? Sure, but there are in other parts of the country. What we're trying to do, we've increased capital investment. We've put capital investment into London, but as you heard the Chancellor say last week, we're also tilting capital investment to the North and the Midlands, which historically have been underinvested in, and that just means that it doesn't go around as much as some people might like to have it.
And can I also ask you about, there was news today on jobs, the fact that there are now tens of thousands fewer people in employment. Now, a lot of sectors, including the hospitality sector, the tourism sector, they are blaming the rise in employers' national insurance. Are you worried about the jobs market?
Well, as always, there's some kind of up arrows and some down arrows on the jobs market. We've actually had, I think it's 500,000 jobs created since we came into office. We know from lots of our announcements today that it will create a lot of demand for jobs in certain sectors around the country, support for public servants as well. But of course, we do have a problem with people not in education, training or skills, particularly at the lower end. We've got a problem in terms of inactivity where people have been too sick to be able to work for a long time. The last government used to just discount people who were sick and not in work and then say employment was going up, but just completely ignored the fact that so many people were coming out of the labour market altogether. Our investment into skills and training, our reforms of the welfare system, our funding for further education colleges, all of these are trying to help get those people back into work so that we can get those numbers up. But we've certainly got a job to do.
One final question, very short answer. Who was the most difficult cabinet minister to deal with?
I'm not answering that question.
Right, we need to let you go. Darren Jones there, Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Thank you very much indeed. And before you go, Paul, just a final word from you on your overview of this.
Well, overall, we got what we expected, which is a fair bit of money for health. Despite what you heard, what sounded like a lot of giveaways, actually really tight for quite a lot of other areas. And as I said earlier, I think three things are going to, my guess is that 3 or 4 things are going to come back and be difficult for Darren and his colleagues. One is defence spending is sticking at 2.6% of national income in 2027. So there's another 2 years to go when there's going to be no further progress towards the 3% the government says it's committed to, and that, they're going to come under pressure on that, I think. Secondly, I know that we've got a reduction in the number of school pupils over this period, but this looks like a very tight settlement for schools, particularly given that some of the money is going on free school meals, and we know that there's real pressure on special educational needs. So I think that's going to be difficult. There's going to be a lot more pressure on public sector pay over this period, and there's not a lot of money going in there for public sector pay. So I think those are the sorts of things where we're going to see continued pressures, but this is a settlement within, as you'd expect, within the tight budgets, and the use has been made of savings from the asylum, from overseas aid, and so on, to smooth out some of those reductions.
Okay, we have to let you go too. For the last time, Paul Johnson, you're standing down from your role at the IFS, but thank you for helping us over so many years understand all of these figures, all very important figures. Thank you to both of you. Let's now go to Jim Connolly, who is in Leeds, to get some more reaction.
Yeah, we're at the old fire station, Close here, obviously, and this is a community centre. And it helps a lot of people in an area where people genuinely suffer. There are 6 charities based out of here, so that gives you a scale of the problem that many people in the local area may be facing at the minute. There is obviously a very cheap joke that we're not going to make about where the axe has fallen today, but we're a serious programme, so we're going to have a serious chat with some people. Fran, you run this place. This area of Leeds, people struggle. What do you think was in today for those people?
I'm not sure there was very much, really. What we really need is for funding to be directed straight at the heart of communities. Things like community ownership of buildings and spaces, so that people at grassroots level can really use their own power and skills to help themselves. They know what to do and what needs doing. The funding needs to come right to us at the heart of communities.
Does it sometimes feel like it takes a long time to filter down? So a big announcement today could take maybe a couple of years to filter down here?
Completely, and the need is here and it's immediate, and I think also by the time it gets to us, lots of people have had a chomp at the pie, and the money is needed here for these people with this real lived experience of poverty and cost of living crisis and all the things that go hand in hand with that.
Well, Fran, thanks ever so much for having us down here. We've got a panel of people who are joining us. They were with us earlier, some of the people, and we're going to get some reaction now. We've heard from the Chancellor to what has been said. Tasha, you're new to us, so introduce yourself to us.
So my name is Tasha Brown, and I run the Black Health Initiative charity, where we fight for better health outcomes for marginalised communities here in Leeds and West Yorkshire. So
we've had announcements around increased investment in the NHS. I'm sure you think, is that a good thing?
We don't know how to feel about it, to be honest. We're very anxious. We want to know how that's going to impact the work that we do here at Black Health Initiative. So I suppose it's just fingers crossed that we have a really good outcome for us in the third sector.
You said to me before that you feel like you're sometimes just picking up the pieces at the end of the sort of line with the NHS. Is that your role?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the third sector, we definitely support the people that fall through the gaps. We help and support the NHS in areas where they can and they fall short. So we get referrals constantly on a weekly basis from different departments in the NHS, and we're having to go out and do clinical trials and health checks on people and do supportive work and outreach work for many of the people in the community. So yeah, the third sector really needs these resources, and we hope it's a good outcome for us.
Henry, introduce yourself again to us.
So I'm Henry, and I'm from the Northern Powerhouse Partnership.
Big picture then, what does this mean for the north of England? What does today's announcement mean?
There's some really big news in the Chancellor's speech, and she indicated that in the next few weeks, very imminently, there'll be an announcement on something called Northern Powerhouse Rail, and that's what would connect cities like here in Leeds, not only to Hull towards the east, but going west towards first Bradford and then Manchester and Liverpool. And that's so important because we know that this city is constrained by the number of people who can get here every day. And that's to do with local transport. But it's also that if we were in London, people in Brighton, people in Cambridge would think nothing of going into work in London every day. The reality is people in Manchester, unless they're prepared to drive across the M62 and sort of take the lottery of how long that will take them, cannot reliably get from where they live to a job here every day. There just aren't enough seats on the trains. So we need to invest in that connectivity if we want to grow the size of the labour market so that businesses like the one that Tom runs can access talent not just locally but from across the north of England. At the moment that just isn't possible.
We were all sat around watching the Chancellor and you gave an audible whoop at one point. You cheered. What was that cheer for?
Well, I've known Rachel Reeves a very long time as a Leeds MP and as Shadow Chancellor, and she was always hugely supportive of us at the Northern Powers Partnership, and our chair, outgoing chair, Jim O'Neill, who's been advising her quite a lot of the time as well in opposition, really working with us on these issues to think about how you could raise northern productivity. And so I'm just really glad that she hasn't forgotten that the north of England is critical for the government's growth mission. Yes, we do need growth in that Oxford-Cambridge corridor, but in the end, if you look at cities like Hull and Middlesbrough, they're both bigger than Oxford or Cambridge. So if you want to do something about national productivity, you can't just look at those smaller, currently successful places. You've got to work out how can you make those places that currently are not as productive as they could be to be as productive as they would be in any other European country. Because the problem in this country isn't that we don't have any success, it's just that here in the north of England we don't do as well economically as our European equivalents. And if we could make our cities here as successful as their equivalents in Europe, we'd be in a much stronger position and contribute a lot more tax revenue to pay for public services like the ones for people who need them in our marginalised communities.
Tom, what does your tech company do here, and did you hear anything in it today that you thought, yes? Did you audibly whoop at any point?
I don't think I audibly whooped. Maybe I'm not an audible whooper.
Silent whooper.
I'm the founder and the CTO of the Data City. We're a 30-person tech company in Leeds. And one of the things that I think was a positive surprise to us was we read the UK government's AI action plan when it came out a few months ago. We quite enjoyed it. There were a few things that we didn't really like about it. It talked a lot about Oxford and London and nothing about Leeds and Manchester, which we were surprised by. We didn't know if there was any money behind it, so I think today it was a surprise to everyone to hear that there'd be £2 billion going behind the AI action plan. That's good for us as an AI company in Leeds. We'll find out the details of that in a few weeks' time, and I suppose that's like a common theme of the responses to the spending review is that we'll find out the details in a week or two's time. We hope they're good. They seem to be not bad. So not bad is pretty good by my book.
You're, in the nicest possible way, a bit of a transport nerd, aren't you?
Yeah.
Right? What was in it today for places like Leeds?
So in the details, not a lot. There was positive sounds about Northern Powerhouse Rail. We've had previous announcements which commit to higher investment in infrastructure. We really hope that happens. I think the details again will come out in the next week or two. So nothing bad. I mean, if you think back over the last decades, what you typically get in these type of announcements is an announcement that investment in Leeds has been cancelled, and that didn't happen today. So we're happy about that.
Right. Well, Vicky, some sort of cautious optimism, maybe sort of couched in very sort of northern English terms of a bit sort of, I don't know, a bit this. I'm not really sure what to make of it all, but that is what people will be looking at going forward.
Oh, thank you very much, Jim. Or maybe it's the first time we've had a whoop of delight. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's ever happened before. Henry, thanks very much, Jim. What's your overview thought of where we are now? Because I think for people watching, things are tight. There wasn't much money around. And yet, of course, you've got these big announcements about things that might be happening, things that might be being built in the Northwest and other places.
Yeah, and a lot of the charts in this document that we're going through, talking about day-to-day spending and its trajectory for the next few years, are pretty tight, tell quite a difficult story for people around the country, for different public services, for the government. That wasn't really the vibe of Rachel Reeves' speech at all, and that's because she was emphasising investment spending, capital spending. But I do think politically there was clearly a conscious choice by the government today to try to use today as a bit of a turning point on a difficult first year. It is almost a year that they've been in office now. Of course, we got the full details on the winter fuel U-turn earlier this week, and then at Cabinet just before today's events, Keir Starmer told his ministers, we're told, that this was the end of the first phase of this government, talked about marking a new chapter. I just wonder, though, if the government might risk moving a bit early to that language, because when you look in the small print of day-to-day spending, the government risks describing a picture of optimism which just might feel a bit at odds with voters' experience of Britain for a little while yet.
Yeah, and they were criticised a lot when they came in for being too gloomy, weren't they? That they were depressing everybody because they kept going on about how difficult things were. Maybe they're just trying to put that right. But I guess the problem is it does take a long time for these capital projects to start, making a difference to people's lives.
And I think the obvious point is, well, they have been in office for a year. If they're now going to come back and say, what, it's a very, very long time to build a train line, or to build a hospital, like, did they really not know that these were their priorities a year ago coming into office? Did they have to go through this whole process of, like, all this foundation? They know, they have made some interesting choices. They have turned the infrastructure tap towards Midlands and the North, away from the South East. That's a potentially historic shift. They have decided to spend more on capital and move it away from departments. So there's some interesting strategic choices. Just worth noting, with my economics hat on, just in terms of the background of the economy, one of the sources of big instability has obviously been the trade war. It is worth noting that President Trump has just announced a deal has been done with China on trade, which is obviously good news in terms of that instability.
And knock-on effects for
and the knock-on effects for all of us. I think in their best reading of this, they would think we've signed these trade deals. We did get those Q1 growth figures. There are other figures that aren't going their way. They're now setting out a plan that they hope everyone can buy into. That's I think, where we are. Can they deliver on it? That's the question.
Okay, let's turn now to Gareth Davies, who is Shadow Treasury Minister. Thanks for coming in to speak to us. We heard there from Jim in Leeds, whoops of delight that things were finally going to be getting built. I mean, your previous government promised a lot about levelling up and making sure that there was regeneration in lots of these parts of the country, and you never delivered on it.
Well, we did have something called the global pandemic and a war in Ukraine, which did dominate the last parliament, absolutely right. There was funding, significant funding actually, that was deployed around the country. We had 13 investment zones that were highly successful at generating new investment. We were second in the world for R&D investment. I could go on, but I thought they inherited a terrible situation, Labour. And yet today, as you've been describing, they were very upbeat about capital investment increasing. And so I'm a little confused as to what the narrative from Labour is. If the inheritance was so bad and they were trying to fill all these black holes, how on earth can they increase spending to such levels? Be in no doubt this is born out of higher borrowing, higher debt, and there will be higher taxes to pay as a result of this. But also the fact that...
So you're against, just to be clear, you're against the extra borrowing and those capital spending announcements that they've made?
I didn't say that, but we are continuing to see...
That's implication, though, isn't it?
Not at all. Let me explain. So they have spent billions of pounds on things they did not need to spend, not least the £30 billion surrender to Mauritius of the Chagos Islands, the £9 billion of pay increases, inflation-busting pay increases with no reform, no productivity gains in return. £8 billion for GB Energy, which is an energy company that apparently doesn't produce any energy at all. There are a series of announcements that this Chancellor has made, and I haven't even started to begin with the U-turns that this Chancellor is starting to make on winter fuel payments. So that's an extra £1 billion that she's going to have to find in the autumn through tax rises. If they cave to Labour MPs on two-child benefit cap, that's £3.5 billion extra a year. So be in no doubt, tax rises, further tax rises are coming, and this government has already increased them to record levels.
But just to clarify, you are in favour of the project she was announcing, but what, you would fund them differently? You wouldn't borrow to fund them, or are you against those
anybody
projects?
that watched that short statement and took away any great detail? We will comb through the detail. She's going
to spend an extra £100 billion on capital projects.
That's the overall, and if you look at our record, we increase capital spending quite significantly too, and that's a good thing. We want that, but it's on the back of an economy that is suffering because of a lack of confidence owing to this government's increased taxes on business and talking down the country for 6 months into office. Sluggish growth that has been downgraded by every international body.
Well, they point to the fact that there was higher growth in the first quarter.
There was, but they inherited the fastest growth in the G7 when we left office, which was higher growth in that quarter. It is just a quarter, but I should mention the first quarter that they were in office, it was 0% growth. The second quarter they were in office, it was 0.1% growth. It's not exactly a great record on growth in the first year for a government that said its number one mission was growth. But you are right. I think where you're going is that we do need to increase growth in our economy. And if we can increase growth to substantial levels, and you can do that by investing in infrastructure through capital spending, then you don't have to borrow as much. But we have, we have a significant amount of debt and borrowing at very high costs because the Bank of England have kept interest rates. They have cut them a few times, but they were projected to cut them even more, and they haven't. They've kept them higher, which means that we, the British taxpayer, are paying more in debt interest today than we are on an entire defence budget. I don't think that's right.
Yeah, but the taxpayer would also say that the tax burden was at a record high under your government, and the present government would argue that a lot of this is about clearing up the mess that you left, that public services were not in a good state, and lots of people watching this will have noticed that.
So taxes did have to rise because we spent £400 billion, and we can debate whether we were too generous and we provided too much support through COVID, but that was £400 billion plus another £100 billion on the back of wholesale gas prices spiking because of the war in Ukraine, and we effectively paid 50% of energy bills during that period, a very difficult cost of living period. And we believe as Conservatives in paying down our debt so that you're not overpaying interest, so that you can spend it on other things like education, etc. So we did increase taxes, but we did get the economy into such a position where it was growing faster, and that enabled us in the last few months, in the last year of our time in office, to cut national insurance twice. And I'm pretty sure your viewers will remember that and notice that in their pay
but a lot of people say that wasn't funded, was it?
It was funded.
The 4p cut in national insurance for employees. Do you regret doing that?
We were delighted to be able to get the economy into a position where it's 2% inflation, it's 3.5% today.
Could the country afford that at the time?
Deficit in half, where we could cut taxes for people in work. If you cut taxes on people in work, that generates a stimulant to the economy. It says to the country, we value work, we want you to work. By the way, this was alongside a plan to reduce welfare by £12 billion. Labour have reduced it by £3 billion. We want them to go further. But you've got to stimulate growth by empowering businesses and by empowering workers. We sought to do that by cutting taxes on businesses and cutting taxes on employees when we were in a position to do so. This government are doing the opposite.
Can I just, isn't there a danger with being, and I understand why you do it, you're sort of engaged in a sort of basket case Britain narrative. The growth rate is what it was in Q1. It's been up and down. It's probably not caused by this government, and it's, as is the fruits of it. It doesn't really matter. But I'm really intrigued to know, on Monday, the Prime Minister had sat next to him, probably the most important businessman in the world right now, the Chief Executive of Nvidia, Jensen Huang, who said Britain was the envy of the world. Now, probably you guys can take some credit for some of that. And this government, doesn't that show, when you've got someone like that who controls the flow of the most important microchips in the world, a guy like that, doesn't that show, in fact, that you need to give some credit, maybe you should share some credit, for where things might go in the future? Because this is all about the future. The growth rates now are not impacted by any of these policies.
This is what's the most heartbreaking situation about this government. We do have in this country an amazing investable opportunity for businesses around the world. John Gray of Blackstone, Jamie Dimon, he said the same when we were in office.
If we were a basket case, they wouldn't be saying that.
I think they still want to come here because, although a lot of people are leaving, by the way, because of the fundamentals of our country. And we have great universities, we have a common language, common law, great regulators. Yeah.
I get. Do you feel a bit bad when you're talking stuff down so much? I mean, there is an opportunity.
I'm talking
in
this
Britain.
Government down. I would never talk this country
down. But the trade deals. Listen.
But how much is that going to affect? Take one.
Not a huge amount in terms of GDP.
All. I mean,
but let's be clear.
Anything.
Under the Conservatives, it was said that you couldn't do a deal with Europe like this and still do a deal with the Gulf and still do a deal with the rest of the world. They said it was impossible. They've literally disproved. Maybe they're not the best believers in Brexit. You guys were, and you didn't manage to sort of sow the thread through the eye of that needle?
Well, we signed trade agreements all over the world, not least entering CPTPP, which is 13% of the global GDP, some of the fastest economies of the world. So it's not true to say that we didn't sign trade agreements. We signed lots of them, and Kemi Badenoch, by the way, was the one to do it.
I have one more question for you. Yesterday, I had Kevin Hollenrake sitting in that seat who apologised, said sorry for Liz Truss's mini-budget. Would you like to say sorry?
I mean, this is a great thing. I know the BBC are really pushing this at the moment to try, it does, I'm afraid, distract away from the issues.
No, I didn't push him. He was very happy to apologise.
Yeah, no, I'm not happy to apologise. I'll apologise for that when Rachel Reeves apologises for the millions of people that had their winter fuel payments withdrawn. I think every government has issues. We certainly had an issue with Liz Truss, but that was many years ago. We have moved on. We lost an election on the back of it. Right now, Labour are pushing pensioners into poverty. They are taxing businesses so that they can't hire anybody. The growth has been downgraded. Inflation is up. Unemployment is up. And unfortunately, unfortunately, that is what people are really worried about right now.
OK, Gareth Davis, thank you very much for joining us. And Henry, if I could just come to you, more about the mood of Labour MPs, actually, because listening to that, it did sound positive, didn't it? It sounded positive about the economy. There's been the reversal on the winter fuel allowance. It was interesting that Richard Bergen, from the left of the party during Prime Minister's questions, got up and said, could you now look at the two-child benefit cap? Is that going to be an issue now, do you think, for the Chancellor?
Yes, although it does seem on the two-child benefit cap fairly inevitable that come the autumn the government is going to abolish it. I mean, they've definitely allowed the idea to fester that they are going to do so. I think what's going to be a more immediate issue for this government and its handling of its own backbenchers, indeed actually some frontbenchers, is welfare. We are expecting finally a vote on the welfare cuts that were announced by the government back in the spring. It probably is still the spring, isn't it? Anyway, a little earlier in the spring. We're finally expecting that vote to come in the next few weeks. There are a lot of
There has to be a Commons vote on that,
There has to be a vote.
Yeah.
That was actually, I think, part of the dynamic between the government and the Office for Budget Responsibility when they were trying to persuade the Office for Budget Responsibility they really could trust them that they were going to save billions of pounds from the welfare budget. That vote is still looking pretty dicey for the government. And I think the
Which is incredible. They've got a massive majority, haven't they?
Well, OK, there's different versions of diciness. Is the government actually going to lose that vote? Almost certainly not. The majority is enormous. But there are sizes of rebellion which no government, however big its majority, will be willing to wear because it just looks terrible. And I think what's really interesting about the winter fuel reversal that we saw finally complete on Monday is that you are not seeing, at least in among the MPs I've spoken to so far, you're not seeing Labour MPs say, well, fair play to Rachel Reeves. She noticed our problem with that and we've got a lot of goodwill towards her now, so we're going to back away from our campaign on welfare reform. They're saying, well, with a bit of pressure, she'll fold. Yeah. And that, I think, is now the dynamic playing out within the Labour Party. And it's quite a dangerous dynamic for, a lot of governments get to a position like that eventually. They haven't been in office for even a full year yet. So I think it is one to really watch for over the next few weeks, as well received as today will have been, I think, in the chamber.
The PM sounded quite robust on that in PMQs. Didn't he?
Yeah.
He didn't sound like from the Richard Bergen
he
question.
has to. He has to, because it's a massive chunk of the budget. That's the distinction with winter fuel. Yeah. One of the criticisms that Labour MPs made of winter fuel originally was all that political capital for, what, £1.5 billion? Yeah. And obviously it's dramatically less now and all the political capital's been expended. Welfare reform, this government really does need to save the amount of money it says it's going to save in order to make these books balanced.
It's a huge amount of money, isn't it?
It's a huge amount of money. And also, I think Keir Starmer has made clear that he really does also believe in it as a moral question for the party of work, the Labour Party, that he believes there are too many people out of work who ought not to be. The problem is, a lot of his own MPs aren't quite in the same place.
There's another challenge here, which is I think that there are a number of long-term issues that will crystallise in this Parliament. Where I haven't read the whole document yet, but I don't think they're mentioned. A couple of big ones. So, for example, they're going to lose if the plans on electric vehicles. Nerdy subject, but this really matters. If the electric vehicles happen, you lose the vehicle excise duty. 30 billion a year. Where are they going to get that tax money from? You would sort of expect in this document, like a little paragraph saying, maybe we'll get a, Pathfinder project to try and work out if it's going to work. At this stage, if you've got any chance of introducing this sort of stuff in the 2030s, they wouldn't go near it. They wouldn't feel like they're politically strong enough, maybe.
Well, that's one of the interesting things after winter fuel, isn't it? Is that this government dared to touch a third rail that so many previous governments would have, with their massive majority, they thought maybe we can actually grapple with a question that other governments have looked at. I don't think they'll necessarily be eager to rush into grappling with others soon, like road pricing.
Let's have a little reminder of what Rachel Reeves announced in that spending review. Big focus on the NHS. Day-to-day spending will be up 3% a year. 13,000 additional police staff. 2.6% of GDP will go on defence by 2027. £4.5 billion more a year being put aside for the core schools budget. £39 billion for affordable and social housing. She also announced £52 billion for Scotland, £20 billion for Northern Ireland, £23 billion for Wales, £280 million for the new Border Security Command and £1.2 billion a year for training and apprenticeships. Well, I'd like to say I'm joined now by the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey. First of all, your reaction to what you heard. Presumably capital expenditure, lots of projects there, which presumably you back?
Well, look at the details. I mean, overall, I think the Chancellor was right to make the point to start off with that the Conservatives had left the public finances in a mess, left a black hole. Our real worry, as we heard her, is she's going to leave a black hole in social care funding. And that's critical for their strategy. They're saying they're going to put right the NHS. They put a lot of money into that, and we absolutely welcome that. That's what we had been arguing for. But we'd also said that you could end up wasting a lot of that money if you don't ensure that family carers and social care is also invested in. And they have no answer on that at the moment.
So you didn't hear anything there on social care that you...
Almost nothing. They talked about the fair pay agreement. We've heard that before. And then they resorted to the Louise Casey Commission, which isn't going to report for 3 years, and they've said won't be implemented till middle of the next decade. So it's real worry that they still haven't grasped this essential thing and you can't fix the NHS unless you fix care. So we're going to be holding them to account on that. In terms of other areas, I mean, clearly defence spending increases are welcome, some of the capital that you mentioned. But
Would you like to see that go to 3%? Defence spending?
We've said that there should be a cross-party consensus and an agreement, a meeting, a discussion to try to get it to 3% quicker than they currently plan.
And to work out how you pay for that.
Exactly. That's why I think that's going to have to be cross-party. When we started looking at the details, and it is very early days, we're really worried about local government. I think that could be really hit in this settlement. And given local councils are on the brink of bankruptcy all around the country, I think that is really worrying. I think the police settlement looks like it's going to be tough to tackle the crime that we all know is out there, and certainly to deliver on what Labour promised. And then I'm worried about rural communities. DEFRA's budgets have got a hit as well. So we'll study the detail, but the big picture is they won't be able to deliver on NHS without social care.
They would argue, weren't they, that they have to make difficult choices, as you agree with them, that you think the Conservatives left the public finances in a bad way. I mean, you have sat on the front benches in coalition where you've seen difficult choices having to be made, including huge cuts to local government. And many would argue that actually that's part of the problem that we're seeing now feeding through.
Well, there are always difficult choices. I wouldn't want to shy from that. But let's give you one difficult choice that I think they've just got wrong, the increase in national insurance for employers, which is hitting lots of small businesses, I think dragging back growth, hitting lots of health providers who aren't protected by it. We had argued to raise the money that we do need for the NHS in different ways. So we talked about taking bank taxes back to what they were in 2016. That would raise £4.4 billion a year. We talked about quadrupling the digital services tax. I know Donald Trump won't like it, but who cares? I think social media giants should be paying more. We talked, for example, that there should be a gambling tax. I mean, the gambling industry, online gambling industry, is making huge profits. We reckon there's a nearly £1 billion you can get from there. So we've put forward, unlike any other party, an alternative costed agenda for delivering health and care spending without some of the, I think, growth-hitting policies that they've adopted, like the jobs tax.
But the IFS does say that actually there are consequences to those taxes that you are suggesting, that actually they, in the end, that raising of taxes does get fed through to the consumer. You make it sound like as if it won't be, because they're just the big media giants. But
there may be the impact on banks and on social media giants, and of course there would be. But compared to the impact on our economy, on millions of little businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, the impact on their employees as well, because all the evidence shows it passed through to less employment and lower wages. I think it's such a bad tax policy, and I think ours is a much better approach, a much fairer approach, and it would ensure that that social care investment was there.
How confident you would raise the money that you need to?
We're really confident. And let me give you another thing we do to raise the money, and that is really push up growth. So we have argued, as you know, that the UK should have a new customs union with the EU. Frontier Economics reckon that in the longer term that would raise public finances by £25 billion because it would have such a positive impact on growth. And that fundamentally is where the Chancellor's getting it wrong, just like the Conservatives did.
That involves going back into the customs union?
Well, creating a new one, actually. You have to.
Okay.
You wouldn't be the same one because we wouldn't be part of the European Union in it. But the European Union has customs union agreements with other countries that are outside the EU. That's what we're arguing for. And actually, our proposal through that would mean a closer trading relationship with the EU than even the Frontier Economics analysis shows. And they were suggesting a really positive impact on growth is hotly surprising. So, the damage that we saw with Boris Johnson's dreadful Brexit deal, that has to be reversed. I'm afraid Labour has been way too timid on that, and that is constraining their ability.
They are moving closer, aren't they,
but
to
arrangement?
You'd lose the India deal, you'd lose the Gulf deal, you'd lose the America deal. Are you sure about that? I understand why you might have said that, but they've now managed to sign these other deals that are helping in the current circumstance.
Well, you talk about the trade freedom, allegedly, that we've had after
Not allegedly.
Brexit.
You wouldn't have got the deal with Trump.
It's only worth having if you actually get really good benefits from it. Right. All the trade deals that the Tories signed were either rollover deals or the Australia and New Zealand deal, which we think were not really good for our country. Then you mentioned the three you've talked about. The India one is not bad, but it's actually relatively modest. And in the EU, you could have got a better deal. I know, because when I was trade minister...
They haven't got a deal with
Hold on. When I was a trade minister, I was negotiating with the EU for a trade deal with India. The people who prevented it happening were the Conservatives. Yeah. And if we'd had that trade deal in the EU, we'd be having far bigger benefits with our trade with India than is on the table with Keir Starmer's trade agreement. So I'm afraid if you get into the customs union again, not only do you get a huge benefit from increasing our trade with our nearest partners, and that's, by the way, way bigger benefit than you get from the trade deals you've mentioned, but you could also negotiate better deals with India. And you may want to mention the US trade deal. I think that's a dreadful trade deal, really.
Good for the steel industry.
Well, we're no
car industry potentially.
Hold on, we're no better. In fact, we're worse off than we were this January. So, lauding that trade deal is giving in to Donald Trump.
Other countries are worse off than we are.
But if we were in the EU, I think we could negotiate. This is really important. If we were in the EU customs union, within that customs union, we could support the EU in negotiations. I think we could get a better deal as a result of that because we have more firepower.
There are various areas where you support government spending or would like them to spend more. One of the big ways the government plans to raise money is welfare cuts. There's going to be a vote on that in the House of Commons probably later this month. You've got quite a lot of MPs now. What are you going to tell them to do in that vote?
Well, first of all, we're going to look at the details of that vote. That's really, really important because there's no doubt we need to get more people into work. We're absolutely up for that. And there are some things that the government have put forward that we would support. So there's the Try First proposal, where you go into work and you don't lose your benefits, and if that work works out, then you do come off benefits. Those are the sorts of reforms that actually make perfect sense, and we've argued, because we do want to get more people off benefits into work.
But the cuts to personal independence
However, when you look at some of the PIP proposals, they will actually leave some people really badly off. Let me take one example that I've talked a lot about and asked the Prime Minister about, and that's carers. I've got an example of someone whose loved one they're looking after, they're not able to work, they'd never be able to go back into the labour market, they're going to lose their PIP, and because carers allowance, which this person claims because their need to be full-time care for the loved one, they lose that as well. The total loss under this government's proposals to that family would be £12,000. We will oppose that.
What about the broader bringing down of the welfare bill, though? Do you think, because lots of people are saying it's not sustainable in the way that it's due to go up, are there any cuts that you do think should be made?
Well, the question is, how do you reduce the welfare bill? It is absolutely essential we get people back to work. But, you know, take the carers allowance again. If you reform that properly, you would get rid of the disincentive to work that's in there. So I know loads of carers. I would argue there's tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of carers who would like to work more, but the carers allowance system penalises them, and therefore they don't do as much work as they could do. Now, that's crazy. Let's get rid of the disincentives in the system that prevent people balancing work and care. That would be quite a big one. I also agree with the proposal from the government that you can try the work first before you lose your benefits, and that then encourages more people back to work. There's 101 things you could do to reduce the welfare budget.
The PIP proposal raises a large chunk of the money that the government plans to then use on spending in areas that you want them to spend money.
There's not one PIP proposal. The PIP proposal has several elements to it. Some are utterly unacceptable, as I made clear. We will look and debate the others. But Charlie Mayfield, who used to be the CEO of John Lewis, he's doing a major review into how we get people back to work. He's coming up with some exciting proposals. It's commissioned by the government, by the way, but I think that is where to go. There's real opportunities to cut the welfare bill and get people back into work, which will really boost the economy and, by the way, therefore generate more tax revenues. So there is a debate on here, but we've got to get it right.
Thank you, Sir Ed Davey. Thank you for joining us here in the studio today with your reaction to the spending review. And Henry, talking about that welfare budget, I mean, that wasn't part of today's announcement, but as you say, it does loom large, doesn't it, over what's going to happen in the next few months?
Yeah, very much so, because I think part of the political backdrop for today is that Rachel Reeves, for years, has had an unassailable position within the Labour Party, including with her colleagues, in terms of her ability to set the Labour Party's economic strategy and the way it approaches a sort of political economy. She's now the Chancellor, and that position is, shall we say, not unassailable. I mean, I'm really struck by the breadth, the ideological breadth of Labour people who will privately question her approach to the economy or indeed her long-term future as Chancellor. Now, that might be a bit overwrought on their part, but what I'm saying is that in the next few weeks you are going to see another really big test of another really big call, a big choice, as she'd probably put it, that she made. And it is going to be very interesting, the verdict that is returned, especially by her own MPs.
And you have to think of the origin story of that welfare cut. It came because of an in-year change in the forecast, which was largely driven by a global change in the Treasury yields. And so they had to come back and find more cuts to welfare. Now, we don't quite know what direction it's going to go in by the time of the budget. But actually the IMF, for example, suggested, maybe you should only do this once a year. You can't be just coming back every 6 months, every time, Donald Trump makes an announcement on tariffs.
They don't do it like that, do they?
Yeah. The Treasury sort of pushed back against it, but it's because actually, here's the problem. If it goes in the other direction and you want to cash in the goodies at some point in the future,
has to be able to do that.
You want to be able to have that freedom. So that's why they might not do it. But this cut that we're talking about was the direct result of the way in which her fiscal rules actually manifested themselves in policy terms. And so it's interesting, that's really interesting. And if you stack this up now, if you have, I think the billion on a winter fuel allowance, it's manageable. You say you could deal with that in the budget. You add in this, if his intelligence is right, I'm not going to doubt it, if it's the full thing, that's $3.5 billion. I mean, there are other sort of middle wage changes you could do, 3-child. And then on top of that, there are other reforms where they may get the taste for the forcing the U-turn. These things tend to be quite viral, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's right. It's an authority question.
Let's get some more political reaction now. I am joined from College Green by Stephen Flynn, who is the Westminster leader of the SNP, and by Adrian Ramsey, the Green Party co-leader. Hello to both of you. Stephen, if I could come to you first. What's your reaction to what the Chancellor had to say? There was quite a lot of mention of Scotland and some of the things that will be some of the investment that is coming your way. You must be pleased.
Yeah, I mean, she's trying to steal my thunder by being so talkative about Scotland, my favourite topic, of course. But look, I think if you're a family right now who are struggling under the cost of living crisis with massive energy bills, or you're a disabled person who knows that their personal independence payments are about to be cut, or you're a business who's watching this knowing that you can't employ staff because of the national insurance increase that has crippled your ability to grow as well, you'll be listening to the Chancellor telling you that everything is fantastic and thinking she's living in an absolutely different world to you. And they'd probably be right to think that, because whilst Rachel Reeves has made a big play of capital investment here when it comes to day-to-day spending across many of her government departments that she's responsible for, there's going to be cuts. There's either going to be cuts or there's going to have to be tax rises later in the year, and that remains to be seen.
So you would like to see her spending more, and if so, how would you fund that?
Well, of course, if you're looking at the NHS, for instance, if I've picked the Chancellor up correctly, I think she said there's a 3% year-on-year increase. In comparison to what's came in the past under previous Labour governments, that's significantly smaller. Now, I'm quite open about the fact that I think the government should be looking at the likes of income tax, but what it should be doing is looking for growth, and it gets growth through migration, gets growth through more people of working age in the economy, and it gets growth by closer alignment to the European Union. We've edged towards that final point, but we've not quite got there in the way that I would like to see. So growth's important, but this budget doesn't appear to outline how that is going to happen, how she is going to be able to meet the expectations of a public which wanted change but up till now has been let down.
I mean, you have the ability, don't you, as the Scottish Government, to raise taxes. Would you go further and do that?
Well, of course, in Scotland we have a progressive taxation system at the moment which allows us, I think it's another £1.5 billion of revenue to spend on the NHS, something which is opposed by opposition parties in Holyrood. If that was replicated by Rachel Reeves, you'd be talking tens of billions of pounds. I think it's about £17 billion, actually, if I recall correctly, that she would have available to her to spend on the priorities of the public, which is ultimately right now about dealing with the cost of living crisis, making sure energy bills are coming down and making sure that businesses can do what they can to grow the economy. She's been a barrier to that up to now, and I'm afraid that from listening to that today, there isn't any change in that regard.
When it comes to the two-child benefit cap, I think you have announced that you are going to scrap that in Scotland, but it hasn't yet been implemented. Is that the case? And if so, when might you implement it? When could people know that they're going to get that extra money?
Yeah, so contrary to Westminster, the First Minister was clear a number of months ago that we would have a different position from the UK government with regards to the winter fuel payment, but also in respect of the two-child cap, just as we do with the bedroom tax, because of course people in Scotland don't pay that, whilst vulnerable people in England do, and the Scottish Government will be implementing that as quickly as possible. Obviously it's reliant upon data from the Department for Work and Pensions, but what a stark contrast between that positive agenda to lift children out of poverty and a UK government which doesn't want to change its mind on the two-child benefit cap. Indeed, I think there was a vote just last year which I helped to put through in Parliament that saw Labour MPs kicked out the party for voting against the party line in relation to that. So if they want to combat child poverty, they should be doing that, but they should be following other policies the Scottish Government have put in place, like the Scottish Child Payment. And we put forward figures from the House Commons Library which would indicate that some 2 million children could be lifted out of poverty across the UK if the Labour Party were to replicate our endeavours that we've already put in place in Holyrood. That's the sort of stuff that the public expect from a Labour Party, but up till now they've been let down.
Stephen Finn from the SNP, thank you very much indeed for giving your reaction to the spending review. Let's move now to Adrian Ramsey from the Green Party. And NHS spending, extra NHS spending, is something that you've been very keen on. Are you happy with what Rachel Reeves has had to say today?
Well, I've been keen on highlighting that people around the country are facing their health services severely overstretched. People can't get access to a dentist when they need one. The hospital corridors are full of patients. And at the same time, our schools are seeing real terms budget cuts. Head teachers I speak to are saying they don't know what they're going to do to make the books balance. They may have to look at making teachers redundant. This is just an awful situation to be in, especially when you also see some of the most vulnerable people in society facing cuts to their disability benefits that they rely on for the basics every day. And what we heard from the Chancellor today doesn't answer those questions, because your own analysis from the BBC has made clear that under Rachel Reeves' figures, from 2026 we will see a sharp decline in funding of public services at a time when we need to be increasing that funding. And that's why the Green Party's been saying there are options for the Chancellor here. She could be asking the very richest in society, the multimillionaires, the billionaires, to pay a modest amount more in tax in a way that would raise tens of billions to invest in those crucial services so that we're not seeing our health, our schools severely overstretched and some of the most vulnerable people in society really suffering.
I mean, there is some evidence, and the IFS are one of those that say that actually a wealth tax, although lots of people think it can raise revenue, it is actually pretty hard to implement. People do find their way around it. This is not something that you can actually rely on in terms of extra spending money.
Well, what's interesting is the growing demands for a wealth tax across different parties in Parliament, including lots of Labour backbench MPs supporting the Green Party's call for a wealth tax. Lots of academic experts who've looked at how it works in different countries and how it can raise you that crucial revenue that you need for investing in public services, supporting the most vulnerable. And I'm now working with a group called the Patriotic Millionaires who say we've benefited from Britain, from the investment that we've had in our country's infrastructure, in our public services, and now we want to give back that bit more that enable us to have a fairer society, that enable us to have access to health services when everyone needs them, for our schools to be properly funded, for disabled people to not be left in the lurch. That's the sort of future for Britain that I want to see, that restores pride and hope.
OK, Adrian Ramsey from the Green Party, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's have a recap and a look now at some of the changes that have been announced by Rachel Reeves today in terms of the changes in day-to-day spending. And that's a comparison between 2025-26, so this financial year, and to 2028-29. So if we look at the science, innovation and technology area, that's 7.4%, which is an increase. Health and social care will go up 2.8% over that period. Justice, 1.8%. Defence, 0.7%. Energy, security and net zero, 0.5%. Then if you turn to the Foreign Office, there's a drop of 6.9%, a drop for transport of 5%, Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, a drop of 2.7%, and for the Home Office, a drop of 1.7%, and then Culture, Media and Support, also a drop of 1.2%. So Faisal, if we look at those, that does demonstrate, doesn't it, how the fact that the NHS is getting more, that there is a squeeze there for other departments. Now, some of them look quite striking. So the Foreign Office, that looks huge. That's partly, is it, to do with the overseas aid budget?
That is the overseas aid budget coming down because it's now the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. We put all of those numbers to Darren Jones, and he sort of, I think the key one was the Home Office coming down 1.7%. He said, and obviously we've just got to help. These numbers haven't been checked by the OBR, and so we have to sort of unpack them and unpick them a bit. And he said that was explained by the fact that they just won't be using the asylum hotels, and that's the cost saving. That's also a policy.
It is a lot of money, isn't it?
It's a policy they want to lean into. So they have a sort of explanation for each of the bits here. Let me just tell you what that number is very specifically. It's the current day-to-day spending over the next 3 years. You'll get different numbers if you include the capital, or indeed if you focus on the capital, which is not wholly a relevant thing to do right now, given that a lot of the spending review was focused on capital. So, for example, if you look at the Energy Department, they have massive increases in capital spending.
And that's investment for projects such as nuclear power.
GB energy and all that sort of stuff. So they're a big winner, although it wouldn't show up in that much. Yeah. And so then the other thing that is being done is that you add up phase 1 of the spending review, which is what's already been decided, with that, which is phase 2. So you've got a 5-year picture and the capital, and you add in the current, and then you get that big overall number of 2.3%, which is why the Chancellor wants to say, unlike when Ed Davey was in Cabinet, which is what she compared it with, this is definitely not austerity.
So she's saying, well, I'm putting spending up, because she's adding together all sorts of different pots.
Yes, and that's not, I can see why she would say, well, I had decided for this year to put in a great amount of money in this year, so I'm going to continue looking at that. I'm also going to continue capital because that's fundamentally my strategy. So there are legitimately different ways of cutting this pie, but clearly there is a squeeze in other departments as a result of the priority on capital, the priority on health, and the priority on defence. That is what we're seeing. That is the choice they have made.
OK, thank you. Let's speak now to Richard Tice, who is the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, who joins us today. Thanks for joining us. What is your reaction to what you heard from Rachel Reeves today? An awful lot of projects and an awful lot of infrastructure spending. Is that something that you welcome?
Well, what we've heard from the Chancellor is an absolute splurge of spending that I fear much of it will be wasted on pay settlements with no productivity requirements, tens of billions on daft projects like carbon capture that nobody thinks works. There's no proof that it makes any difference whatsoever. And I'm already seeing this all over the place. So when I challenged the Chancellor in the Chamber, I did actually give us some good news. In the 10 councils that Reform are already controlling and running, we're identifying savings of tens of millions of pounds already on running costs and on capital costs. And that's the smart thing to do, is to start saving wasteful spending, smarter spending, and then you can invest that in frontline services and get better bang for your bucks. But this Chancellor is allowing borrowing to soar, hundreds of billions more of government debt that everybody's got to pay the price for. The price of government borrowing is going up, inflation's up, unemployment is up, and we heard in the last couple of days 250,000 jobs have disappeared down a huge crater of a loss of confidence in this Labour government just since the blunder budget last October.
I mean, Rachel Reeves would argue that she is borrowing more, but she's borrowing it to invest and she will get a return on that money. Your spending proposals, if we just look at one tax cut proposal on its own, is going to cost between 50 and 70 billion pounds a year. So you would be borrowing for tax cuts.
The problem is you're relying on completely fake information from the useless IFS. That number's about.
So how much would it cost?
That number's about 40 billion, and you save that by, for example, stop paying voluntary interest in the Bank of England to enrich city institutions on the printed money, the quantitative easing. Stop doing quantitative tightening. I've written to the Governor of the Bank of England. That
there
can
are
save
some who think that won't work.
No, the other central banks are not doing this. It is negligent of our central bank to be doing this. If you scrap net stupid zero, you save tens of billions every single year.
But a lot of that is private sector. No, but that's an important point. You do talk about this a lot.
I do.
That saving, a lot of the spending on net zero is from private individuals and the private sector. That's not government money.
Literally, in the hospital in my constituency, the Pilgrim Hospital, they're now spending £23 million ripping out a perfectly good heating system to replace it with a net stupid zero compliance system. That is a grotesque waste of money, and that is happening across the whole country. And if you look at the Climate Change Committee's projections for spending on net zero over the next decade, it sets out the graph, and there are tens of billions every year of public sector money. That should stop. It's a grotesque waste of taxpayers' cash.
But when you talk about the bank reserves as well, the National Institute for Economic and Social Research has said that what you're suggesting is very dangerous, it's likely to be counterproductive, and it would imperil financial stability.
So why are other central banks doing it across Europe? Why is the ECB doing it? Why is no other central bank doing quantitative tightening? And why do two former deputy governors of the Bank of England agree with me? Why do lots of other senior economists,
have you had a
including the
response?
Financial Times...
You've written, haven't you, to the governor of the Bank of England?
Just responding to your point. Actually, many journalists, economists, commentators, former deputy governors of the Bank of England agree with me. Tice is right on the principle. You can negotiate about the quantum, but I'm negotiating on behalf of the taxpayer. I think the sum should be zero. Stop enriching city bankers, and then you can invest it on the front line in healthcare and the like, for example. And yes, so I've written to the Governor of the Bank of England. I'm looking forward to a response. It's only Wednesday. No doubt he'll be thinking about it. I'm looking forward to hearing from them.
Would you say that your party is now a big state party? You have said that you want to see, for example, and you've seen that you welcome the reversal of the winter fuel allowance cut. Do you think the state should be doing more or less?
We want a smart state. So we want to motivate work. We want to motivate risk-taking, deregulate, so have smart regulations, not massive daft regulations. And that's how you get growth. You can't tax your way out of a crisis, as this Chancellor thinks you can do. No, you've got to grow your way out of a crisis. The tragedy at the moment is entrepreneurs, business owners, risk takers, they're fleeing the country. They've had enough. It's not worth it in this country under this disastrous Labour regime.
Richard, hello. Faisal Islam here, BBC Economics Editor. You think you can get £35 billion out of the Bank of England through this method? That the bank, a director's given a speech today and sort of implicitly criticised your plan as raising volatility. I mean, doesn't this risk There's this risk of sterling crisis. 35 billion is a hell of a lot of money.
I repeat the point. Other central banks around the world are not doing what this Bank of England is doing. And guess what? They're doing fine. They're not doing quantitative tightening. The number now, because interest rates have fallen, because they've stupidly done some quantitative tightening, imposing tens of billions of losses already on the taxpayer, the number now is about 25, 26 billion pounds. This is absurd. This is our cash that is enriching bankers and city institutions, and I'm really angry about it.
So to be clear, you would extract from an unwilling Bank of England, an independent Bank of England, £35 billion a year. That's your plan to fill in any gaps in your budget?
That's part of our plan. You scrap net zero, as we've touched on.
And you scrap the independence of the Bank of England as well,
No, hang on. No, that's not what I said at all, and it's very clear in my letter. Right? The independence of the Bank of England on setting interest rates, on ensuring market stability, that's one point. But making massive strategic decisions about taxpayers spending billions of pounds on voluntarily paying interest on printed money, or voluntarily, foolishly doing quantitative tightening. That is a strategic decision that should be debated and held to account by people in Parliament, elected officials, not unelected officials.
And Richard, just one final quick question and answer from you. There will be a vote on cuts to welfare coming up. How are your MPs going to vote?
We'll look at the details of that and make our decision at the time. I haven't got that in front of me, so I can't make a judgment here live on TV, I'm afraid.
OK, Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, thank you very much for joining us. And just for a final word, your overall view of what you've heard today, a lot of it was expected. How do you think it's going to go down on the Labour backbenches?
I think pretty well. I think they'll be happy with what the Chancellor said in the House of Commons. I think as the reality of this document settles in, though, it might have a sort of rougher reception. The big debate about economics in the Labour Party at the moment, including among Labour MPs and including privately among some government ministers, is whether the Chancellor ought to increase taxes or change her borrowing rules in the autumn, and I don't think she's closed down that debate today at all.
OK, thank you very much indeed to Faisal and to you, Henry. That's all for today, but I'll be back with even more tomorrow from Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and on the iPlayer. Thank you very much for watching.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves sets out her new plan for spending with a promise to invest in security, health and growing the economy.
In this spending review, total departmental budgets will grow by 2.3% a year in real terms. Compare that to the Conservative choice of austerity.
LA's overnight curfew has just come to an end. Police say they carried out mass arrests of those who defied it. 17 officers are injured in a second night of clashes in Ballymena in Northern Ireland following protests over an alleged sexual assault on a teenage girl. And the sun's south pole closer than we've ever seen it before. The remarkable new footage unravelling the mysteries of our closest star. Hello, I'm Anita McVeigh and welcome to Verified Live. It's a hugely significant day here in the UK as the Chancellor Rachel Reeves has been setting out how taxpayers' money will be spent by the government until the end of the decade. We're going to have lots of analysis over the coming hours. And right now, let's cross straight to my colleague, Rajini Vaidyanathan, who's at Westminster for us. Rajini.
Thanks very much, Anita. Well, it's been a busy day here in Westminster as the UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves delivered her spending review, which essentially sets out what spending is going to go to each government department until the end of the next decade. It's important to say that this is not about any tax-raising measures. It's all about how the existing funds are going to be distributed, and different government departments have come out better than others. Well, let's take you through some of the main points. First of all, the Chancellor confirmed that total departmental spending will grow by 2.3% over inflation per year. She said that spending on the NHS would rise by 3% a year after inflation, and she confirmed £39 billion for social and affordable housing. The Chancellor also committed to a boost in defence spending and pledged to end asylum hotels in the next 4 years. Rachel Reeves said she was rejecting austerity. Our first report comes from our political correspondent, Layla Nathu.
When will we feel better off, Chancellor?
Soon, fingers crossed, is what she's thinking. Rachel Reeves leaving Downing Street this morning for Parliament for a crucial moment in her time in charge of the country's finances.
Yes, see you later.
Earlier, cabinet ministers met to hear how much money their departments have been allocated for the coming years, both for spending and investment. Some have done better than others. Trade-offs unavoidable with limited room for manoeuvre in economic terms.
I call the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves.
In the Commons this lunchtime, the Chancellor set out her stall.
We are renewing Britain. But I know that too many people in too many parts of our country are yet to feel it. This government's task, my task as Chancellor, and the purpose of this spending review is to change that, to ensure that renewal is felt in people's everyday lives, in their jobs and on their high streets. The priorities of this spending review are the priorities of working people.
She's giving day-to-day spending across all departments an above-inflation boost and said she was taking a different approach to that of the Tories.
In contrast to our increase of 2.3%, they cut spending by 2.9% per year in 2010. So let's be clear. Austerity was a destructive choice for the fabric of our society.
There are cuts to some departments, including Transport and the Foreign Office, but schools and defence have been given an uplift, and the NHS was the big winner.
This Labour government is making a record cash investment in our National Health Service, increasing real terms day-to-day spending by 3% per year for every single year of this spending review. An extra £29 billion per year for the day-to-day running of our health service.
The Chancellor also set out areas for longer-term investment, around